Hi everyone. This is my second take at this because, as some of you have pointed out to me, I managed to do the whole thing without having my wonderful microphone turned on last time, which was all rather embarrassing, especially as I'm trying to be displaying how to do this stuff. But hold on, we all do these things every now and again. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of go through what my 5 teaching tips are at the minute for particularly new members of staff, I think. So the reason why we're looking at this is, first of all, there's a large amount of teachers that have left profession, so we're predominantly talking about secondary school. However, you're also looking at all the other areas such as primary school and further education as well. You're looking at school spending cuts, so generally this is reflected all the way through the industry, where although the actual total amount of money that schools get has gone up, the actual net amount of money that students get has gone down because things cost more, and the amount of money that we need to invest in things has gone up. And we things like IT, for example, my industry, there's a lot more IT about these days, and the amount of money that we need to invest in it keeps getting more and more and more. And between the last 3 years, basically, about half of the teachers have thought of leaving the profession. I'll admit that certainly I've thought about it at certain points, because you do kind of wonder, could you do more elsewhere? Could you potentially do slightly more with your career? But at the end of the day, I think that pretty much there isn't a job out there that would give you as much satisfaction as teaching will do. So yeah, just some general tips really. I'll try not to linger too long on them, but I want to ramble. So ultimately my number one, and this is hugely important, is you need to give yourself time to relax, because you're not going to be able to do every job. I'll get to that later on. And if you do just spend your entire life working, then you are going to burn out, and you're going to develop things like mental illnesses such as stress, anxiety, depression, and so on, because ultimately you are not giving yourself any downtime. You need to try and find things to help you relax outside of the workplace, whether it be reading books or going to the gym or I don't know, playing golf, whatever it might be. You just got to get yourself out of the bubble sometime, because ultimately it's not healthy otherwise. You got to ask for help, because as new members of staff, you will find that there will be other people who have worked for a long time, or even if they haven't worked for huge amounts of time, they've probably worked for longer than you have in this area. Ask them for help. We're all new ones. You may have a student that you're struggling to deal with. You may have a criteria that maybe you're struggling to meet, or maybe students are not submitting work, whatever it might be. Do not be afraid to ask for help. Now, in further education, there are in most colleges tutors who are employed as advanced practitioner style roles. Those guys are very good to talk to, but even within your own area, there are usually a few people that have been there a long time. By all means, talk to them. Yeah, and if you're struggling with things like workload, you have to talk to your line manager. Don't just kind of let it build up, because ultimately, what will happen is you keep getting more and more and more work, and if you don't kind of discuss it with your line manager, then they won't know that you're struggling to deal with it potentially. Unfortunately, with teaching, you'll find that there is no magic formula. So, especially when you are at the beginning of your career, you'll find that you will try out certain techniques, and some of them will work, and you'll come away, you think, yeah, that's a fantastic lesson, really nailed that. And then you'll do the next thing in another lesson, and actually it won't go anything like that. The key thing is, you need to just kind of almost, take it on the chin, and you'll learn more from the lesson that didn't go well than you would for the lesson that did go well. And you kind of need to try and figure out, why did it not go so well? what things could you do differently? Are there certain kind of characteristics of the class that meant that, it didn't quite, go as planned? Never kind of give up, because, like I said, things won't go well all the time. Even the most experienced teachers, come back, from lessons and they'll be like, So I think the key thing is, keep learning, keep accepting advice, because other people may see things differently to how you do, but you've still got to do it your way, because ultimately only you can teach the way that you do, if that makes sense. Because ultimately, I've come across some absolutely fantastic teachers in my time, but I could never be like them, and the same way that they could never be like me. Number 4 is workload. Now, ultimately, the most important thing is always going to be your next lesson. Always. You will get absolutely bombarded with work to do all the time. However, ultimately, you will need to prioritize the next lesson, because that's what we're employed to do. We're employed to teach learners, and the learners will need to complete various different courses, whatever they might be doing. Try and enjoy it where possible, because ultimately, if you aren't enjoying it, then it becomes a really horrible thing to do. And to be honest with you, if you're not finding any enjoyment from the job, then it really isn't the right thing for you to be doing. And take some time out, because ultimately, it's all about making sure that you're in a good place mentally to do this. And if I'm kind of, or at least the way that I work, I will kind of work for maybe 50 minutes and then have a cup of tea, take my mind off things, and that makes me more productive for the next 50 minutes than if I just worked straight through. But everyone's different at the end of the day. The last one is to keep it simple. So I'm a big fan of trying to keep tasks relatively straightforward. So, for example, I don't tend to go out of my way to make resources that are massively fancy. It's simply, unless it is something that is going to last me a long time, it doesn't make any sense to me. Try to make resources which won't take you too long, but actually you will get good responses from the learners. So maybe consider flipping classes around. So, for example, if you have a particularly dry topic, you could get the learners to research that topic, or you can get people to work in groups. You can do things like wikis and so on. Ultimately getting the learners to do stuff is always much more effective than you standing there at the front, talking for hours. Or if you're spending, a long time to produce a resource and then they do it very quickly, it may be the fanciest thing in the world. And they may love that 3 minutes of wonderful activity, but actually, from your point of view, it's not something which is going to stand you in good stead, simply because you've not necessarily made an amazing use of your time. Now, you may kind of find that 2-hour task that takes 3 minutes you can reuse 30 times, and if that's the case, great. But ultimately, I'm a big advocate of making sure that you use your time to the best of their ability, or your ability, students' ability. Especially, for me, as a further education tutor, you would expect learners of a certain age to be able to actually go out and do a lot of research and work that way, or probably more effectively than if you were to do a lot of exposition as a tutor. As you kind of get younger, or as your students get younger, you'll find that you probably need to do more kind of smaller and sharper activities to keep them engaged. So you will know your students, hopefully. But I think the key thing for me is have a think about the length of time that your resources are taking you, and then the amount of time which you think that they will take in lessons, and then it's like, okay, well, is this really the way forward? So just to recap, it's a fine time to relax, ask for help, realize there is no magic formula. You will need to work at it always, even if you've been teaching 5 years, you'll still need to work at this. Try to keep your workload manageable. and you will find with the workload that there will be jobs that won't get done. I mean, that's life, and ultimately you'll need to kind of work out which ones you don't need at that particular time. But as you become more experienced, that's something you'll work out, and keep it simple, stupid, really. So yeah, I hope those have helped you out, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to me today rather than watching me and seeing me flick through the PowerPoint. It is now half term for me, so have a good evening, and I'll see you soon.